There's two more chairs. There's one there and one there. Sherry will start like 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. You're welcome. Terry, when you come up, don't forget to clip this back on. Okay. I'm just going to make a couple of quick announcements before we get to our introduction for our reader tonight. Tonight is the first poetry reading for YVCC in 2007. And you're here either as a student or as a fan of Terry's work, but there are 5 readings this spring scheduled. And Terry is our inaugural, our kickoff reading this year. And all the poets who are going to read this year are from Blue Begonia Press. Jim and Karen Bodine's press, located just 3 blocks from here. And if you're interested, on the website, writersandideas.blogspot.com, or if you want to help us out by taking a poster and putting it up at your place of work or someplace you go for coffee frequently, that'd be great. I'll leave these up on the corner up here. Also, after the reading, there are some books that are available back there. Terry's books for sale back in the back. And she, I'm sure, would be glad to autograph and have conversations. And as I mentioned sort of briefly between the lecture and the reading, we have kind of a tradition of going out afterwards and have an iced tea and French fries and get to talk to the poet a little bit more. And we have been going to Red Robin, but this year we're going to go to the Sports Center. Does anybody need to know where the Sports Center is? Downtown Yakima. We're going downtown. Downtown. Okay, so the Sports Center is right downtown. It's the guy shooting the gun sign. Okay, yeah, okay. Next to the Olive Garden, right. And then we have until 11 o'clock, and then they kick out the under 21 crowd, right? Okay. Yes, that's right, that's right. Okay, so I'd like to, and I'm honored to, introduce Terry Martin as our first reader for the Writers and Ideas lecture and reading series. And some of you may know Terry as a great teacher. There may be some of you as former students. Some of us here may think first of Terry as a friend. And some of you, many of you maybe, are meeting her for the first time tonight. But tonight we are here to witness her poetry, or even better, to witness poetry itself. Terry, in the lecture she gave before this, was talking about that. It isn't the poet so much as the poetry that we're here to pay attention to. So we're all participants in that communication and that communion, to use her word. Because if there's one thing Terry's poetry shows us, it's that everything is a source for a poem. Our daily routines most of all. So it's her poetry, but it's yours too. And that's my kind of poetry. I also think the title of the book is particularly well chosen, The Secret Language of Women. As I told students today in class, in my 101 classes, I was telling them, come to this reading tonight. I said, The Secret Language of Women, I said, if you come, you just might find out what the secret is. So we'll see. That's a good title, but the title is important for deeper reasons too. I think Kim Nowacki, who wrote a little explanation of these readings, put her finger on it when she calls the book subtle yet powerful. She says Martin's book is warm, candid, and insightful, a memoir of the non-verbal traditions, gestures, habits, dispositions that pass among women. It is insightful writing. Of the many good reviews this book has gotten, both informal and formal, this sums up the book the best. Warm, candid, and insightful. Terry Martin captures on the page, verbally, the nonverbal traditions. It was just what Joycelyn before the class, a student in the class, came up and she said, God, I'm so excited about this book. She says what you can't say. It's the secret language. Now I'm giving it away. It's the secret language is that she's able to say what we can't say, or we don't say, I guess I should say. So, that's a good definition of poetry also. For Terry, this language is a touch language, or a vision language, or a scent memory, not recorded history. Something more like oral history. Maybe it's touch history. And it is candid. Disease, loss, sex, doubt, passion, it's all here. She is direct in the way any good poem is. Her talent, her gift, lies in transforming all of that on the page. And for Terry, this transformation has a habit of making us recognize, accept, even feel good about these traditions. That's one of the things that draws so many readers to Terry's poetry, and to Terry as a friend and as a teacher. She takes what's unsaid and says it in a way that needs little translation, but that makes us feel stronger for sharing her feelings. We know her details from our own lives, but have not had the ability to get them down on the page, and we have not had the chance to see them in context as significant. Terry has. Terry does. Insightful, candid, warm. Those are some of the gifts, those are some gifts to have, some gifts to give to us. Help us welcome Terry Martin.
Thank you. That's very nice. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And then you want to leave this in here?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks for those kind words. I appreciate it. I see a friend back here, my friend Norm and Ann were at our house on Sunday for brunch, and Ann said she was coming to the reading tonight. And I said, well, great. How about you, Norm? Can you come? And he said, well, that depends whether I choose the road to the Final Four or the road less traveled. So, Norm, thank you for choosing the road less traveled tonight. And thank all of you for being here tonight on full moon night, for showing up for some poetry. I'm going to begin my reading with some poems from the first section of The Secret Language of Women, which opens with an epigraph by poet Jodi Eliason. If you want to know why you are here, what you have come here to learn, look for what repeats itself. Sunday afternoons. Her religion was baking, and out of stiff but obedient batter, she made something sacred yet practical, like cake. Her cathedral, a yellow kitchen, where instead of prayers or hymns, there echoed hungry beaters chewing through flour and eggs. Her Bible, a red and white cookbook. None dared slam doors against chocolate's dark mystery until the toothpick came out clean. Her disciple was this girl, and how she learned to worship the possibilities of sugar, vanilla, almond, by licking the wooden spoon. I'm going to read the title poem. I don't read it very often because it's kind of long. It's called The Secret Language of Women. Ironing, pressing the collar, the cuff, sprinkling water from a pop bottle shaker, steam hissing, spitting, evening up seams, each stroke a straightening, trimming your bangs, Scotch tape along forehead, good scissors awfully close to your eyes, snipping, clipping across your brow, she backs up and takes measure, carefully cutting the even line. Dividing, discarding, what hands know. Holding the ripest cantaloupe, squeezing the ready avocado, plucking bananas and grapes from their clustered families. Pantry filled with mason jars, apricots, plums, floating jewels. Lids she will dust to a golden shine. Pint containers lined up in the freezer. Rows of raspberries, peaches, evenly spaced. The knife's power in her hands. Slicing the sandwich into matched triangles. Onion chopped, tiny squares sizzling in the black iron skillet. patting the meatloaf twice for good luck before sending it into the oven. Each butter cookie the same round size, the print of her thumb pressed in. To make sure things are even, one sister gets to slice the cake, but the other gets first pick. Folding things, the care she takes. Cloth napkins worn smooth, panties compact as they looked in the package, socks coupled in drawers. Feel the weight behind each simple act, the secret language of women. This song she's teaching you, the song you'll learn, and you'll know exactly what to do. This next poem's about my grandmother. I was lucky to have had a really great grandmother. Tracing. More fun than other grandmas, mine wore a weathered leather mitt for afternoons of backyard catch. Baseball and conversation tossed easily back and forth over freshly mowed grass. I studied her palms like maps, memorizing their well-traveled roads, then turned them over, stroking their silky crepe paper. I traced the paths of pronounced veins, built dams in those bulging rivers, and watched with wonder as blue tributaries flattened and disappeared, only to reappear at my command. I held my own small hand up next to hers, tried to imagine a time far in the future when mine too might hold such rivers, tried to imagine this time, now, when they do. I just turned 50 a couple weeks ago, and I realized my grandmother was that age when she was playing catch with me. Freaky. Someone here, I think it was you, said you really liked the poem Fifth Grade, so I'm going to read this for you. It's about learning about the birds and the bees. Fifth grade. We knew something was up when they separated us. Boys to the gym with Mr. Fisher, girls to the cafeteria with Mrs. Morrow, where we sat in straight rows on the glossy floor, facing the stage, while she frowned and chewed her upper lip, face red as a poppy, plunged a wooden pointer at the headless woman's torso, segmented and labeled like cuts of meat in a cookbook. Parts foreign as countries on the social studies map, fallopian tubes northeast and west, central uterus, south to vagina. This was serious. What were the boys doing while this woman who had taught us to diagram sentences told us we'd be getting our periods soon, said we'd be women then. And during our special time, no swimming, no horseback riding, no wearing white. When she held up the sanitary belt and Kotex pad, I looked down at the floor. A black and white film strip followed, clicking the mystery of salmon upstream. I had plenty of questions about blood and maps and fish, but if I'd asked them then and there, when we filed out of the room, back toward the boys, I'd be fighting my way upstream for a long time, struggling, flopping, gasping for breath. And another person, is it Jocelyn or Joycelyn? That's you. Someone told me they liked her place and asked me to read it tonight. Yeah, so I'm going to read that. This is a story about the power of reading in a young girl's life. I grew up across from a park. I spent a lot of time in trees. And sometimes in those trees I had books. This is called Her Place. And when you arrive at the big oak, twisting and winding over still water, look up at the young girl hidden high in branches, nestled in the V of scarred limbs. From her perch in the sky, she has seen you coming, aware of your presence all along. This place is hers, ducks gliding, reeds rustling, green scent of solace. She knows the dark water holds secrets, fish, turtles, frogs, breathing their mysteries below. Does she climb away from or towards? From the book resting open in her lap, you can tell she inhabits other places too, worlds far from this one. She waits there, measuring time, the distance between where she's from and where she's going, made tolerable by what she finds in those pages, by what she finds held high in sheltering arms. Heaven for my mother. 64 new crayons in a green and yellow box, the sharpener built right in. Bright flames rising in tiered rows. Vivid choir singing full, rich chords. Copper, silver, gold, coveted fortune of brilliant points. Plenty of paper to make mistakes, and she doesn't have to share. This next poem came from a workshop I took from a very bad teacher. She was a great poet. She'd won the Yale Younger Poets Award, but she was a mean teacher. I didn't trust her. And she gave us a very good assignment, which was write about a potent phrase from your childhood. That's a great invitation, you know, but I wasn't going to go there with her. So I wrote about a potent phrase from my partner Jane's childhood. And this is called, "You're as bad as the boys." "You're as bad as the boys," she would tell her 5 Catholic daughters, shaking her head, the frowning accusation burning, smoldering. As bad as the boys. The boys were her 4 sons, Ron, David, Glenn, and Pat. As bad as the boys was Cheek and Sass, asking why Great Aunt Tilly wasn't married, why Nini and Ha-Ha never had any kids. Whispering or pinching during Sunday Mass, was getting such a bad case of the giggles during dinner that milk squirted out of your nose. Muttering Jesus when you were mad, shouting or swearing or whistling or whooping, slamming the screen door on your way out, was living loudly. As bad as the boys was breaking the rules, running fast in packs, skinning knees and bruising shins, picking scabs, spitting, launching overripe tomatoes at one another out back in the garden until your hair dripped spontaneous seeds and sweet red pulp. Jumping into the icy creek with all your clothes on, wrestling in the barn, tumbling and panting and sweating golden in the hot summer hay, was living in your body. As bad as the boys was talking back, asking questions. As bad as the boys was standing out, was being noticed. I know a couple of you've heard me say this, but I shared this with my sister, who afterwards said, well, if you had chosen a potent phrase from our childhood, what would you have picked? And I said, well, probably one thing my dad always used to say, which was, you give it your best shot and then to hell with it. And she said, I always wondered if he turned his head when he said that, and you only heard the first half of the sentence, and I only heard the second half of the sentence, because it would explain a whole lot about my neurosis and hers. So that was about a bad teacher. I'm going to read you a poem that was inspired by a wonderful teacher that I was lucky to have found. And it's called Kindred Spirit. Tired after feeling your way in the dark for so long, you are looking for cracks of light. Need them now more than ever. Another woman appears. Her voice soothes. She speaks from love, reminding you, no one remembered is ever lost. It's almost always tiredness that gets us in the end. You must dare to tell your own story without blinking. She helps you remember what you know. Hope flutters in your chest, rising up like birds from cover. This poem's about having to tell your family something you're scared to tell them. And for some strange reason, I chose to do it over a board game. It's called Top Hat, Thimble, and Iron. Passing go, you collect what's due. Over this game, tonight, you'll tell them. Ruffle your thin stack of pastel money while Mom draws community chest. Dad lands on chance. Again, take inventory. Survey all properties, tiny greenhouses, red motels. Pennsylvania, short line, reading, B&O. How you wish you could hop one out of here. But no, tonight you will tell them. Doesn't that orange get out of jail free card make you feel just a little bit better? Maybe you'll find that what holds you together is both fragile and strong. Buying Park Place, you wonder if years later your stomach will still lurch at the Scotty dog, the boot. Bored open wide as your new world, it's your turn. Wanting a sure thing, but knowing better, you roll the dice and speak. This poem's about an aging friend who was going through a very hard time, and we have lost her since, but she was very important to me. It's called When I Went to Visit, Though She'd Asked Me Not to. I saw faded slippers shuffled beige, tangled silver springing wild. Violet bruises and black scabs bloomed up and down her arm. I heard gasp and rattle of sandpaper breath, her slip and slide in and out of here and now. I held her gnarled hand for a while, then left behind 5 purple tulips in a clear glass jar, petals closed tight as a fist. A quarter acre. Last night I dreamed you in your garden, suspendered and gloved. You leaned into your shovel, plaid shirt tucked in tidily, cap pulled low against midday sun. Asparagus, sweet corn, tomatoes, beans, everything in careful, even rows, lines straight, corners clean. No weeds, no animals allowed. Hoe and slingshot hung on the shed door. In a life that has no place for conversation, where does a voice go? Yours into a quarter acre. Only there did you dare to be happy. Now, when I find myself tending something with care, mixing Windsor violet with cadmium yellow to get just the right brown, I stop, lean against it, and find you there. This poem is called Inheritance, and my dad thinks it's all about him, and it isn't. Don't let anyone tell you, like I said, that poetry isn't dangerous. Inheritance. Your memory for details and pride in that. A tendency to hold a grudge. The drive to do your best, even when it doesn't matter. Okay, that part's about him. A face that becomes what someone else needs. Loyalty even to things long gone. A quick and strange anger. That flint arrow of longing lodged in your heart, taking up residence. This next poem's an elegy for my mother. If we could go out to lunch. We'd sit in the booth with the river view, falls crashing over rocks as they always have, and order salads, feeling righteous. We'd laugh at things only the two of us share. The woman on the bus grabbing Grandpa's new broom, thinking it was a pole. How never saying a word he tried to hold it steady, not wanting to let her down. That time we got the giggles on the Amish tour and couldn't stop laughing, tears pouring down our faces, gasping and snorting until we were sternly ushered out into the 20th century. I'd tell you of the sign I saw on Old Harrow Road. Eat spuds, be strong, fear not. How this morning, reaching into the bathroom cabinet for my toothbrush, I found it ribboned with toothpaste, a small gift from my lover. I'd show you the new silver glints in my hair, deeper lines crinkling my eyes than you ever got to see. How my hands are looking more like yours. I'd ask you what you miss the most. And we'd split a dessert, creme brulee maybe, roll our eyes upward, moan at the decadence of smooth vanilla, cool beneath its crusty golden shell. Across the table we'd hold hands and marvel at the fact that your touch was my first language and my touch was your last. And this is the last poem in section 1. In my multicultural lit class today, we studied an essay called Imaginary Homelands by Salman Rushdie. And he talks about sites of memory and the places that evoke strong sensory and emotional responses from us. And this is a poem about one of my sites of memory. It's called The Place I Dream of When I Dream of Home. Here is the house on the corner, white with green shutters. These are the 5 steps I climbed thousands of days, never once imagining there would be a last time. Here are the purple, lavender, and white lilacs growing along the shed. The combination to that lock is 6, 20, 26. This is the rock garden where my mother planted tulips. Here is where I grew a skin that wouldn't be shed for years. Across the street is the park, the pond where you skip stones, ripples expanding into concentric circles, where ducks congregate, quacking for breadcrumbs. That's the rock fireplace ice skaters huddle around in winter. There, that hill, it's called Suicide, where the girl in the plaid skirt and her brother in the salt and pepper pants gave me a bloody nose and pushed my sled down to the bottom. Here is the tree I read in, nestled between branches. I watched people from that perch in the sky. This stone bridge was safe in bike tag. Here is the softball diamond where mornings I pitched for the Pee Wee team and afternoons played second base for the juniors. And this is the greenhouse. I came here to be alone. Here is the fountain filled with coins by those wishing for something else. That sound, that's the ice cream truck 2 streets over, playing an old tune, gathering the children in. I'm going to read a few poems from the second section of the book, which begins with an epigraph by Adrienne Rich. Oh, you who love clear edges more than anything, watch the edges that blur. This poem's about first love. Swagman. We're 18 and 20 on this hill, clueless that neither of us will ever know a simpler season. Deep in these woods, you and I build something new and frightening, coming closer, exchanging glances, confidences, secrets untold till then. Doing the best we could with how little we knew, telling ourselves, without promises, we might stumble our way on this unmarked trail of negotiated joy, that a summer's pure desiring and unrestrained union might hold, remain deep in our minds and hearts forever. And so it has, 30 years, as now I recall first exploits we dared when you stood, clear, in strong sunlight, on the brink of adulthood, meeting my gaze and gift with a full return that lives in me still, undiminished. This is a poem about a fallen friend. It's called Fall Equinox, and it begins with an epigraph by Reynolds Price that says, "But I wonder if we're cut much deeper than we know, by a sharper blade." The first day of fall, you can hear the crank and groan of the great wheel turning to the west. Since Lisa killed herself, I've steered clear of poetry. When I first heard the news, my spine hummed destiny being played out. Cut deeper than I knew, it stopped me too. When Lisa went down, a friend says, as if she were a soldier, and that feels right, but why? We'll never know what deaths her soul sustained before the final one. Even further away, her absence gives voice to our longing, stirs up the restlessness and desire that still live in each of us. I let it stop me, but the wheel turns toward darkness. Time to begin the descent again. Autumn's invitation to dispel illusions. I wrote this poem for my friend. in response to a postcard he sent me when I was far from home and needed to hear from a friend. It's called Shadow and Light, and it too begins with an epigraph by Richard Hugo. An act of imagination is an act of self-acceptance. Today, the postcard arrives announcing your first exhibit, photos from your anniversary travels in Greece. On the card, 3 photographs in shifting light. Arched doorways, crumbling stairs, stones pushing through cracked plaster, a wooden gate closed. On this island, in this cottage, I am further from home than I thought I'd be. I sit with what I don't yet know, stoking the stove with cedar, fanning embers into flames. It's late October. Tonight we lose an hour. You and R took that vacation alone, just the 2 of you. Yesterday I found these words from Thoreau, copied them in my journal. Eyes were not meant for such groveling uses as they are now put to and worn out by, but to behold beauty now invisible. May we not see God? On the back of the card, in spidery handwriting I have trouble deciphering, you thank me for my encouragement. I propped the postcard in my windowsill. Green boughs waved behind the pane. When I turn back to the wood stove, tinder sparks tender, kindling catches kind. We give each other what we need, fuel for fires that might one day burn. These next few poems address those edges that blur when illness visits your family uninvited. When it happens. Who is ever ready? 8 in the morning and already hot in the backyard, skimming the everyday news. Coffee steams in the mug. Banana bread rests on a saucer. Next door, a kid practices trombone. Hollyhocks, daisies, cosmos in bloom. Relentless sun. In the grass, the terrier heaves a deep sigh. Hummingbird vibrates the air. Lavender's heavy with bees. The trombone's uneven cry, breath blown across an open bottle. Dust motes swirl in an eddy of light when the phone rings and you move toward its news, startling as a dropped dish. Diagnosis. Like a firefly, a moment of illumination, sudden and surprising it appears, this sparking fear of losing you. I keep it flickering in a jar, holes punched into the tin lid. In the hospital, waiting. When the nurse brought you a surgery cap, you put it on, leaving a few blonde wisps sticking out near your left ear, golden straw poking from an otherwise tidy bale. And I wanted to walk across the airless room, reach out and tuck those stray strands behind your familiar ear, until every hair on your head was safely encased under clear plastic where it belonged. I wanted to lean across the pole, tubes, wires, and hold you close. Cup your breast one last time. Look deep into your determined eyes, reminding you, I'm right here. But the nurse was standing there, ready to go, and hardly recognizable, gowned and capped. You were already far away somehow, and didn't want tenderness. Not then, not there. So instead I said, you missed a spot. Watched you tuck loose strands under elastic, containing it all. Said, good luck, as she wheeled you away toward anesthesia, breathing tube, scalpel. And I'm waiting now, waiting, while they excise seeds we hope haven't grown. Sitting here thinking of your unruly hair, of those parts of you that resist taming. Surviving winter. Leaves bear their brief glory, colors weaken and fade, and your world becomes nothing but snow. Exacting its cruel promise, winter wants you to live on borrowed light. To shoulder the cold, you gather edges, drift into the frozen shadow of your most ragged self. Out there, what doors and storm windows try to keep out, branches trembling under weight of snow, exhalations of wordless mist, the violence of winter's desire. You dream of entering easier weather, imagine kinder seasons beyond this one, holding all they've ever held. But on the coldest days, the ones too fierce for words to touch, it's hard to remember that under the ice, water still flows. Retrieval. By flowing water, rough edges soften, and I come to remember myself. Along the riverbed, branching trees point to the quiet passage of the moon. Tonight, even cobwebs vibrating silver in the air invite notice. This river smooths me like one of its stones. It turns and bends, not letting me see too far in the distance. Current rushes over rocks, circling boulders into vortex, like the sizable eddy in each of us, the shape of loss, the hurtling down, the depth of it. This is a love poem. It's called Amsterdam. On a night like this, toward the end of summer, in a room with a view of 7 bridges along the Black Canal, we sat high on the sill, framed in a second-story window. The lamp glowed red, green, and blue. Moonlight ribboned dark water below. A sad song we didn't yet know drifted upwards. Love dying or someone alone. Grief beyond our imagining then. Everything we did was making love. Van Gogh's blue iris, haystacks whorled into golden rounds. Anne Frank's small rooms, her red plaid diary. On our little windowsill, we reached for one another, for the wildness. Everything there foreign but each other. And this poem's called Grace. The phrase on the page that stops the heart, the outfielder coming up smiling with the ball in his glove, the voice that brings the moment to the music, and the song to something we already know. Blessings that raise us up, make us more. The luck and luxury of these days, of this time, with you. Before I close by reading a few poems from the third and final section of the book, I want to thank a few people that are here. Jim and Karen Bodine, the founders and publishers of Blue Begonia, are here. Will you raise your hands? They might not all know you. Yeah, thanks. Thank you both for your constant support of me and my work, and for your service to poetry for 30 plus years. The gift to this community as well. Rob Prout's here too. Raise your hand, Rob. Raise it. The guy standing up there looking around. Rob was the lead designer of this book, and responsible for the beauty of the front and back covers and of the divider pages. And he said to me early on, I want us to make a book that you think is beautiful and that you love. And we did. We made a book that I think is beautiful and that I'm happy with. So thanks, Rob. And finally, your teacher, Dan Peters, who has brought Blue Begonia into the 21st century and created a blog that's really helped us promote our books and made people aware that these are out there and available. So, and also created this class and this reading series that is wonderful for the community, a gift to this community. So thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, there you go.
The third section has to do with using everything. And the first poem I wrote on a road trip when I was on my own in the Southwest. And both the title and the idea of the poem come from a poem by Ray Carver, which is called Sunday Night. And he writes, make use of the things around you. Put it all in, make use. So I shamelessly stole the title. It's called Making Use. This steam on the window pane, for one. Strong coffee in a stoneware mug, my left hand wrapping its warmth. Outside, heavy rain falling, needles trembling, glistening on cedars and pines. A dog listening, head tipped, to sounds beyond my ears. A world of fog and drizzle, a world that's nothing but silver. In here, the sizzle and scent of garlic, the clatter of forks and spoons. Someone humming off-key, a country western tune. A lost voice I still hear in my head. The sorrow planted under my ribs blooming. That man staring out the glazed window, talking to a woman who doesn't even pretend to listen. Faces I've never seen before and won't see again. The feeling of knowing no one, of no one knowing me. The wide open space of all this. Like the river, you cannot stop. Out here, in these woods, you touch what will outlast you. Empty, wordless, ready to be filled, you hear ancient sighs in the branch trembling, in wood catching fire. This river makes a way. Like time, its current goes only one direction. Yielding to the flow, you are listening for the sound of trees becoming themselves, for that small moment when geese begin their landing, when root splits the rock, greedy for light. This one I wrote while at a writing residency, far away, deep into the poems. And it's where this book came together, came into fruition. It's called Hedgebrook, Late October. I wrote it to my friend Michael, who had encouraged me to apply, and I'm so glad I did. I want to tell you what it's like under this slanted cottage roof, words brimming, the shape of each empty hour or day or week, a glorious opening. Like living in an orchard, hungry, plucking fruit from the limbs. Like combing a craggy shoreline for the truest shells, glistening. Untying knots that hold memories in, I pick up an unraveled meaning. Take a strand and spin it along until it becomes part of the weave. Neither grieving nor longing, I wake from another forest dream and find myself thinking, bliss, blessed, thank you. Like accepting everything, what of me is known, what is not, how I say what I can, like that. Just a couple more. We'll call it good. My poems usually start in my journal, and then eventually they move to the poetry pole here in town. And after that, sometimes they find their way a little further from home into journals or magazines or anthologies, or now into this book. And this is a poem about that writing process, what the notebook holds. And I think Jim's going to be talking to you when he's here something about journals and how his process works. What the notebook holds. Memories stretching and yawning, glue and dynamite, endings leading to beginnings. Lovely things, full rich chords, a particular blue that moves me. Dangerous things too, barbed hooks, questions frightening to ask, the copper taste of envy. What I wish I'd said. Secret passages, shortcuts, trails that lead somewhere, and some that don't. Arrogance and inferiority, something that didn't matter for a long time and then did. Lies too, some I still believe. The tear that falls when a secret is told, what I think I understand, but maybe not. All there is to grieve and to be grateful for, the color of a clear dream, metaphors lying dormant in the place of not yet, troubles and what I've done with them, crossings, the texture of these days, things hoped for but withheld, all the necessary bafflement, the poem waiting at the end of this one. And I'm going to end with the last poem in the book, which also is a love poem. It's called Morning Campfire. Yeah, that's about right. Flames lick the early air, crackling tamarack and rising smoke merging last night's dreams. Hands uncurl from the cup. Poking ashes with a stick, you rearrange logs. Pine and coffee scent this dawn, river rushing by as it always has, through deep canyons, cliffs scarred with age, past weathered boulders, hunched, waiting. At the confluence of many currents, you and I rest, released from the thorny thicket of old habits. Here in the rocky, dusty places, our striving means nothing. We are learning we are not who we thought we were. Fingers tracing warm knuckles, I pocket your words like small stones, shiny and private. Carry them. I have all that I need today, gratefully tilting my face upward, toward the warm, the changing light. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
coming, Terry. And our class has a couple of things that we, as part of our tradition of having readers, we present a gift for your gift to us. So the first one is this chocolate bar. I'm not sure if this is part of the secret language of women, but
Chocolate works for women.
There's a chocolate bar here.
Yeah.
And then
Oh, that's
Diane
sweet.
Hare also has
Oh, hi, Diane.
a gift.
Thank
And
you
I
so
think
much.
That is the secret language of women, and it's in the colors that you use so beautifully in your poetry. Thanks for your time and for the poems.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Woo!
Irish
Nice.
she said. She said
Yeah,
Irish.
that's gorgeous. I know. She noticed, she was in a book club I talked to earlier in the week, and she noticed a lot of recurring things in my poems that I had not yet noticed. So
That's great.
thank you very much.
So please join us afterwards at the Sports Center if you want to go out and get a bite to eat, something to drink. And join us again in 2 weeks for Jim Bodine's reading, same time, same place, here at YBCC. Thank you all very much for coming, and thanks, Terry, again. for
Thank
coming.
you. Thank you very much. Thanks,
That's
Andy.
great. Nice job, Terry. Beautiful. Yeah, you bet, you bet. If my students could help put the tables back in the right spots, that'd be great. Thank you. And there's books for sale back there, and she'd be glad to sign them.
I will be happy.
Okay.
For me to explore. It was a great invitation to think about why I do what I do, and imagine sharing with you some of my notions about poetry. So part of it I'll be reading, part of it I'll be talking with you, and part of it we'll be sharing some poems together. And you can feel free to stop me at any time along the way if you wish. I do pretty much talk this fast, so this is me decaffeinated, okay? I'll just warn you, so if he's having you take notes, do your best, you know. Why do some of us attempt to express our truths and creativity through poem making? Choose to face the blank page, to put pen to paper, to take the risk inherent in sharing our creative work with an unknown audience? Since Dan invited me to come talk to your class tonight, I've been thinking deeply about why I do, about what poetry, both writing poetry and reading poetry, are all about. Why it matters to me so much, why I hope it matters to you too, and maybe now more than ever. And I'll talk about that as the evening goes on. The comments I'll share with you today refer mostly to the writing of poetry, but they all have to do with the reading of poetry too. Just quickly, a show of hands. How many of you are writers? Writers of poetry? Raise your hands high. Okay? And how many of you have always read poetry? And how many of you are new to poetry? This is kind of okay, we've got a real nice mix. Good. Well, I think this will apply to all of you in one way or another, both as readers or writers, or both. I'm going to share with you 6 gifts that poetry gives me. 6 reasons why I've chosen to make reading and writing the poem a central part of both my personal life and my professional life. And after I talk a little about each reason, I'll share with you some of my very favorite poems by my very favorite poets. Texts that resonate for me and I hope help illustrate these 6 points. So I've got a little handout for you I'm going to give you, and that's the plan. And then we'll get moving here. Oh, I'm hooked up. Can someone help me with the handout before I ruin all the technology? Thanks. Would you make sure everyone gets one of those? Thank you. I had so much fun putting together this handout. It was part of my spring break, but it was worth every minute of it, trust me.
And before we get going a little bit further, how are we doing for sound? We need a little bit more?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
People saying yes. Let me try it here. Now try.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me now, as they say on the commercial?
Not now.
Is it good?
That's a little better.
Thanks, Dan. Did you get a handout, Dan? Great. So that's the plan. 6 gifts poetry gives me, why I've chosen to make it a part of my personal, professional life, some poems that I think help illustrate those points we'll see, and that's the plan. Let's go. The first thing that I get from poetry is that it, believe it or not, slows me down or brings me home. And that's important for me. Let's face it, in some ways, our world is mixed up and scary and sad and confusing and upside down. Our nation and our world is facing all sorts of challenges and problems. And for many of us, it's hard to pick up and carry on with our everyday lives in the midst of war and devastation and natural disasters and economic insecurity and political chaos and loss and grief. I'm a downer, right? But it's true. Sometimes it's hard to find your way through the day in the midst of all that chaos. Technology, too, has changed us as a people in ways I don't think we fully understand yet. It's quickened our pace to the point that we're constantly invited and sometimes forced to multitask. There you go, technology. Faxes, emails, iPods, 24-hour news, blogs, reality TV. We live in a culture of sensation, bombarded all the time by external media. I worry sometimes that we're losing our ability to focus, to sustain attention. Many of us are addicted to these diversions. We're wired to them, literally. It's as if there's not enough nothing these days. That's a line that's been bouncing around in my head for a long time. And the poem isn't there yet, but there's not enough nothing these days. But amidst all this noise and distraction and interruption and chaos, I find that poetry, both reading poetry and writing poetry, reminds me to slow down, to breathe, to be here now. And I need that reminding. I'm one of those people who needs it. The poem brings me back to my center. It calms me, what the Buddhists call my monkey mind. I have a tendency to bounce around. The poem centers me in that way. It reminds me that all I need lies within me. And I can forget that very easily. Beyond the immediate and the urgent, it points me to what is essential, to what really matters. I believe that poetry plunges us all into the longing for such a place where it is the essential that asks for our attention. A place of solitude, of silence, of beauty, of truth. In this fragmented world, the poem is a way of including the wholeness of life in a brief glimpse. So, reading and writing poetry brings me closer to the poem that's within my own being. Slows me down, brings me home. Let's look at a few examples of some poems that are favorites of mine that I think kind of embody this idea on page 1. And I'm going to ask some of you to help me out tonight. I've been teaching for 4 hours today, and I have the reading afterwards. I hope some people will volunteer to read some of these poems so that I don't have to read them all. But I want to share a few of my favorites with you. Beginning with Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life. Another favorite of mine here is The Soul House by Molly Peacock. Would someone volunteer to read that for us and read it out loud? It's nice to hear it in someone else's voice. Is anyone brave?
All right.
Thank you.
To the Soul House, no guests can be asked, though it is calm as a lake. Its shore so prepared, anyone who stops by wants to build there. But no, who lives here lives unmasked. Across the waxen floors slips only a soul into a soul's bathroom, tattered of course. This is what spirits at home wear. That bowl receives real plums, the vases real flowers. Soul breath is quite real, too, its naked powers insisting it be housed exclusively for its air alone, pure being. And no secrets in the house, in the soul house, only privacy. A place to grow in, but not outgrow. Not emptiness, but emptiness. A source.
Thank you. How about Prayer by Galway Cannell? Whatever happens, what is what I want. Only that, but that. What a great poem. 3 is in a row, you know. Short poem that says a lot. And Wild Geese, one of my very favorites. Does someone want to read that one out loud? Anybody willing? Thank you very much.
You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
And finally, The Peace of Wild Things. A volunteer? Thank you.
The Peace of Wild Things. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought, but grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars, waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and am free.
Thank you very much. You all read beautifully. So one gift from poetry, slowing me down, bringing me home. And these are just a few of many poems that I think exemplify that idea and resonate for me in that way. A second gift of poetry for me is that it wakes me up and asks me to pay attention. The poem reminds me what's worthy of my time by inviting a particular state of awareness, penetrating and focused, yet also open and permeable. That's tricky. Penetrating and focused, yet also open and permeable. Sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? I believe that there are appointments that each of us is called to keep. Rumi puts it this way, quote, "This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond," end of quote. So the poem helps me to attend moment by moment to these arrivals in my life, to come into steady presence, free from distractions of interest or boredom, to pay attention to what is there, to those gifts that come every day. Attentiveness is a kind of prayer, I think. When reading or writing a poem, I'm in that flow, that deep concentration, and self disappears. So does time. You've all felt that before, involved in some kind of creative pursuit where you lose track of yourself and your own ego, and you lose track of time. You look up and hours have gone by. That's a wonderful thing when it happens, a blessing. And the poem gives me that. Reading poems and writing poems gives me that. Jane Hirschfield describes it this way, and she's brilliant. I love her work, and I love her writing about her work. She says, "In the wholeheartedness of concentration, world and self begin to cohere. With the state comes an enlarging of what may be known, what may be felt, what may be done." So the poem enlarges you in the possibilities of what may be known, felt, and done. It leads to a widened seeing of your own life and to a larger, deeper life. What's better than that, you know? So a few poems that I think kind of embody that idea of waking up, paying attention, being ready for what comes on page 2. First one, Gift by Czesław Miłosz. A day so happy, fog lifted early, I worked in the garden. Hummingbirds were stopping over honeysuckle flowers. There was no thing on earth I wanted to possess. I knew no one was worth my envying him. Whatever evil I had suffered, I forgot. To think that once I was the same man did not embarrass me. In my body, I felt no pain. When straightening up, I saw the blue sea and sails. Will somebody read Antonio Machado's Is My Soul Asleep? Somebody willing? Thank you.
Is my soul asleep? Is my soul asleep? Have those beehives that work in the night stopped? And the water wheel of thought, is it going around now? Cups emptying, carrying only shadows? No, my soul is not asleep. It is awake, wide awake. It neither sleeps nor dreams, but watches, its eyes wide open, far off things, and listens at the shores of the great silence.
Eyes wide open and listening. How about A Blessing by James Wright? Someone want to take that on? Are you willing? Thank you.
Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bound softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those Canadian ponies, darkened with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willow to welcome my friend and me. We step over to the barbed wire into the pasture, where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as we wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young turf of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, where she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long hair that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly I realized that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom.
Thank you. And thank you for fixing my typo as you read it. I appreciate that. I Thank You by E. E. Cummings. This is one of my favorites. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings, and of the gay great happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human, merely being, doubt, unimaginable, you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. And finally, the Stephen Spender poem, I think continually of those who are great. Anyone want to give a shot to that one? You don't have to if you don't want. Thank you.
I think continually of those who are truly great, who from the womb remember the soul's history through corridors of light or the hours of suns endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was their lips, still touched with fire. She tunneled the spirit clothed from head to foot in song, and who hoarded from the spring branches, the desires falling across their bodies like blossoms. What is precious is never to forget the essential delight of blood drawn from ancient springs, breaking through rock and rose before our earth. Never to deny its pleasure in the morning's simple light, nor its grave evening demand for love. Never to allow gradually the traffic to smother with noise and fog and the flowering of the spirit. Near the snow, near the sun, in the highest field, see how these names are pleaded by the waving grass, and by the streamers of white cloud, and whispers of wind in the listening sky. The names of those who, in their lives, fought for life, who wore at their hearts the fire standard. Born in the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun, and left a vivid air sign with their own.
Great elegy there. I like that. So the second reason, waking me up, asking me to pay attention to my life and to the things that arrive, being open to what comes. A third reason that I've turned to poetry in my life is that poems help give shape to experience. Poetry is a kind of storytelling, right? The narrative event moves a poem forward. So they answer our human curiosity and our longing for shapely forms and for meaning. Our desire to know what happens. Really, we say, and then what? What next? Tell me more. That's very human to want to know what happens next. And our hope is that what happens will somehow make sense. Poems instruct us in both in these hungers and in their satisfactions. They shield us against arbitrariness and despair. Milosz, who we read earlier, when asked why he wrote poetry, replied, "To find my home in one sentence, concise, as if hammered in metal, not to enchant anybody, not to earn a lasting name in posterity, an unnamed need for order, for rhythm, for form, which, 3 words, are opposed to chaos and nothingness." The poem is an antidote to chaos and nothingness. It gives shape and helps lead us toward meaning. That's what I'm trying to say by claiming that poetry gives shape to experience. It lends meaning to the events in our lives. I can give you a personal example of how this can work. I wrote my very first poem about a number of years ago, while my mother was in a hospital bed in our living room in Spokane, Washington. She was dying of breast cancer. We were working with hospice so she could die at home, and my dad and I were taking care of her. And had been doing so for several weeks, round-the-clock care, up every hour for morphine. Pretty intense and difficult, and she was in pain. We were losing her, and my heart was cracking open. For some mysterious reason, I was called to write a poem. I'd never written a poem before. And on Mother's Day that year, I wrote the following poem. It's called Mother's Day. In spite of all this, her tulips are blooming in the rock garden just outside the window. Panoplies of red, yellow, orange, white, planted last year as the measure of her hope. Inside the house, my mother lies dying in a rented hospital bed, a fading star around which everything now revolves. Funny somehow to think of it as a living room, and yet that's what it is. Still, to control the pain as much as possible and to get you home. Those have been the shared and stated goals all along, our top priorities. So here we sit, and now what? A whole new vocabulary these days: catheter, bolus, enema, hospice, IV, bowel movements. Morpheus, the god of sleep. A parallel universe she now inhabits. A relatively peaceful place, fortunately, but one to which my father and I have no access. So, on this strangest of Mother's Days, celebration doesn't feel possible. Overshadowed by the pain, hers, of course, most obvious, but also his, theirs, mine, and the unspoken realization that this is the first one we haven't been able to celebrate, and our last one together. If I could, Mama, I'd take you outside to see your flowers today. For just beyond these walls, right on the other side, bloom the tulips that you planted last year for the first time in your life. This is just one example of how a poem helped give shape to my experience. The writing provided a kind of a container, bringing me to a deepened coherence and connection with many levels of myself. It was also one of those times when my poem knew more than I did, consciously at the time. The poem led me. I didn't lead the poem. Lots of other people have written poems that give shape to experience, and lots of them come from grief, though not just grief. In fact, I believe you're having Jennifer Lawrence come visit you at the end of the quarter, and she writes masterfully about grief and writes beautiful poems that lend shape to very difficult, challenging experience. You're lucky to have her. I'm really looking forward to hearing her reading that night. But let's look at a couple other examples of poems that act as containers or give shape to difficult experience. On page 3. 3 Times My Life Has Opened by Jane Hirschfield. Does someone want to read that so we can hear it in someone else's voice besides mine? Thank you.
3 times my life is opened, once into darkness and rain, once into what the body carries at all times within it, and starts to remember each time it enters the act of love. Once to the fire that holds all. These 3 were not different. You will recognize what I'm trying to say, or you will not. But outside my window all day a maple has stepped from her leaves like a woman in love, with winter dropping in the colored silk. Neither are we different in what we know. There is a door, it opens, then it closes, but a slip of light stays like a scrap of unreadable paper left on the floor. Or one red leaf, the snow releases in March.
Thank you. In Passing by Lisa Mueller. How swiftly the strained honey of afternoon light flows into darkness, and the closed bud shrugs off its special mystery in order to break into blossom, as if what exists so that it can be lost and become precious. How about The Long Boat by Stanley Kunitz? Someone read that? Thanks, Doug.
When his boat snapped loose from his moorings under the screeching of the gulls, he tried at first to wave to his dear ones on shore, but in the rolling fog they had already lost their faces. Too tired even to choose between jumping and calling. Somehow he felt absolved and free of his burdens, those models stamped in his name tag: conscience, ambition, and all that caring. He was content to lie down with his family ghosts in the slop of his cradle, buffeted by the storm, endlessly drifting. Peace! Peace! To be rocked by the infinite! As if it didn't matter which way was home. As if he didn't know he loved the earth so much he wanted to stay forever.
Thanks, Doug. Yeah. So, giving shape to experience. A third reason. The fourth reason why I read and write poetry is that it creates connections with others in ways that I had never imagined. I've got a postcard on my office wall that an ex-graduate student gave me. He's now a middle school principal, and it says, "We read to know we're not alone." Well, paradoxically, writing, which is a private, solitary, internal act, also leads to surprising connections with others, links that I had never imagined. and that I'm really finding to be rewarding. Alice Walker, the African-American writer, says, if I write deep enough, someone in China will read my work and say, that's so Chinese. I love that. How alike we are beneath all of our differences, those common threads that bind us. We're even like those people who bug us the most. In fact, maybe we're especially like them. Bill Moyer talks about how democracy needs her poets in all their diversity, because our hope for survival is in recognizing the reality of one another's lives. He says, we nod yes and say, that's just how I felt when my mother died, or when I spied the first crocus parting the snow, or when the maple withered outside our breakfast room window, or when waking from surgery I looked into my wife's eyes, or when I took my new grandson's hand into mine. Democracy needs its poets. In reading and writing poetry, poet and audience are fused. There's a link that happens and occurs, whether we ever meet each other or not. It's a kind of a communion that occurs. I really believe the poem can transform our lives. By learning to read and appreciate poetry, we acquire all sorts of invaluable resources that we never lose, that you get to carry with you forever. Ways of observing, means of evaluating, reasons for believing and acting, modes of thinking, and opportunities for sharing the experiences of those like us and unlike us, with whom we share a common bond, despite historical differences or cultural differences. Poetry teaches empathy, how to feel with and for others, and it teaches judgment, how to evaluate options and make decisions in a world of increasing complexity and ambiguity. In short, it changes us and it changes the world. James Baldwin put it this way: you think your pain and heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive or who had ever been alive. So you say, yeah, that's just how it is. I felt that too. It's the place in the poem where you go, uh-huh, yes, there. That's connection with other people. Let's look at a few poems that I think do that. Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Anybody want to give that one a shot? Thank you.
Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weekend's broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it, till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes any sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend.
Thanks. Excerpt from 26th to the 30th of July, 1984 by Reynolds Price. Long years more to use what I think I finally glimpse, the steady means of daily love in daily life, the patience, trust, suspended fear, to choose one soul and stand nearby and say, be you, be near but you, and thereby praise, thank, recompense the mind of God that sent me. And the last one I'd like to read on this, have someone read, is The Embrace by Mark Doty. Volunteer? I'm wearing you out, aren't I? Running out? Thanks, right there.
The Embrace. You weren't well, or really ill yet either. Just a little tired. Your handsomeness tinged by grief or anticipation, which brought to your face a thoughtful, deepening embrace. I didn't for a moment doubt you were dead. I knew that to be true still, even in the dream. You'd been out, at work maybe, having a good day, almost energetic. We seemed to be moving from some old house where we lived, boxes everywhere, things in disarray. That was the story of my dream. But even asleep, I was shocked out of the narrative by your face. The physical fact of your face, inches from mine, smooth-shaven, loving, alert. Why so difficult, remembering an actual look of you, without a photograph, without strain? So when I saw your unguarded, reliable face, your unmistakable gaze opening all the warmth and clarity of you, warm brown tea, we held each other for the time the dream allowed. Bless you. You came back, so I could see you once more, plainly, so I could rest against you without thinking this happiness lessened anything, without thinking you were alive again.
Thanks. So creating connection with others, another giant gift that poetry brings to me in my life. A fifth reason I turn to the poem is that the poem inspires truth and freedom. Poetry is free speech. It's the preserve of honest talk and the outspoken heart. It's not about orthodoxy or conformity. It's about truth and freedom. It's on the side of the irrepressible spirit. It's in opposition to the censor, to management, to protocol, to the suits. It's on the side of exhilaration and vision and dreaming. The love of language is the love of truth, and this can bring one into conflict with authority, since power employs deceit and is so fond of it. Poetry is one way of speaking truth to power. What makes good poems matter is that they offer a truer account than we're used to getting. They surprise us with clear pictures of the familiar. Emily Dickinson once said, "Truth is such a rare thing, it is delightful to tell it." I see poetry as being political and being radical. I've got an essay that at the end of your packet that I'll have you look at when we're finished today that's called "To Invent What We Desire," that explores this idea of the poem as a route to freedom, as a route to truth. And I have a few poems here on pages 5 and 6 that have to do with poetry as political. The first one there by Sherman Alexie. Dan, will you read that? Because I think it's good for students to hear their teacher say the F word really early in the quarter. So,
sadly enough. All right, on the Amtrak from Boston to New York City, Sherman Alexie. The white woman across the aisle from me says, look at all the history. That house on the hill there is over 200 years old, as she points out the window past me into what she has been taught. I've learned little more about American history during my few days back east than what I expected, and far less of what we should all know of the tribal story, whose architecture is 15,000 years older than the corners of the house that sits museumed on the hill. Walden Pond, the woman on the train asked. Did you see Walden Pond? And I don't have a cruel enough heart to break her own by telling her there are 5 Walden Ponds on my little reservation out west, and at least 100 more surrounding Spokane, the city I pretend to call my home. Listen, I could have told her, I don't give a shit about Walden. I know the Indians were living stories around that pond before Walden's grandparents were born, and before his grandparents' grandparents were born. I'm tired of hearing about Don fucking Henley saving it, too, because that's redundant. If Don Henley's brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers hadn't come here in the first place, then nothing would need to be saved. But I didn't say a word to the woman about Walden Pond because she smiled so much and seemed delighted that I thought to bring her an orange juice back from the food cart. I respect elders of every color. All I really did was eat my tasteless sandwich, drink my Diet Pepsi, and nod my head whenever the woman pointed out another little piece of her country's history, while I, as all Indians have done since this war began, made plans for what I would do and say the next time somebody from the enemy thought I was one of their own.
speaking truth, you know. Page 6, To Be of Use by Marge Piercy. The people I love the best jump into their work head first without dallying in the shallows and swim off with sure strokes, almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. And one other poem I love here about truth, a ritual to read for each other. Will you do that one?
If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade, holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we could consider, at least the parade of our mutual life gets lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep.
Thanks. Finally, a sixth gift that poetry gives me. It invites risk, growth, and change. Internal change and external change. Don't kid yourselves, writing poetry is dangerous business. It requires humble efforts toward unflinching, open, steadfast looking. When you write a poem, you're daydreaming, but with added intensity. While you're writing, your mind moves between consciousness and the unconscious in the effortless effort of concentration. The result, if your intensity of attention is sufficient, can be a poem that brims with its own knowledge. As I said earlier, a poem that sometimes knows more than you knew consciously. A poem that can teach you a thing or two. You don't write just to say what you mean, you write to find out what you mean. You know, Stafford told us that. We write to find out what we mean, not just to tell others what we already know. The process of revising a poem isn't arbitrary tinkering. Jane Hirschfield calls it a continuous honing of the self at the deepest level. You're not just revising the poem, you're revising a self as you revise the poem. Yeats talked about that in an untitled quatrain way back. He says, "The friends that have it I do wrong whenever I remake a song should know what issue is at stake. It is myself that I remake." Revision is a remaking of self, not just a remaking of poem. Not mere tinkering. It's deeper than that. This is both terrifying and transformative. Knowing and not knowing are both involved in writing a poem. If you're going to learn what lies outside of yourself, you have to step beyond what already lies within. And that, again, can become dangerous territory sometimes. You have to open to what you don't already understand, what you have not already decided. Habit, laziness, and fear conspire us to keep us comfortable with the familiar. There are lots of messages around that say, don't go there, don't do that. But poetry invites us to explore both the lit and shadowed places within, to move into the unmapped, uncontrolled wildness, and to be touched by it and transformed by it. The poem surprises us into the deepened vulnerability that we both want and we fear. It can be scary. Why? Well, like a great love, it challenges us at our very core. Our conceptions, our solitudes, the very ground of our being. A good poem makes us tremble a little bit. But at the end, we know and feel what couldn't be felt by a path less demanding than that. So again, poetry can be transformative. There's no turning away. No attempting to exclude the difficult parts of our lives or of what we know about the world. Hirschfeld says, to write is to open one's door to what chooses to knock, not knowing whether you'll meet the disguised God or the disguised demon of so many traditional tales. Either visitation bears gifts. So you're opening to both light and shadow, and either visitation brings us something. A few poems that I think demonstrate this, and then we'll wrap this up. I guess it's going longer than I thought. Page 7, The Journey by Mary Oliver. Someone want to read that one? This is one of my all-time favorite poems.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
One day you finally knew what you had to do, and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save.
Thanks. This excerpt from Muhammad on the Mountains by Naomi Shihab Nye is another of my favorites. Part 3, maybe you had other reasons. Maybe you didn't go up the mountain because you were angry. This is what I am learning, the voice I hear when I wake at 3 a.m. It says, teach me how little I need to live. And I can't tell if it is me talking or you or the walls of the room. How little, how little. And the world jokes and says, how much, how much. Money, events, ambitions, plans. Oh, uncle, I have made myself a quiet place in the swirl. I think you would like it. Yesterday I learned how many shavings of wood the knife discards to leave one smoothly whittled spoon. Today I read angles of light through the window. First they touch the floor, then the bed, till everything is luminous, curtains flung wide. As for friends, they are fewer and dearer, and the ones who remain seem also to be climbing mountains in various ways. Though we dream we will meet at the top. Will you be there? Gazing out over valleys and olive orchards, telling us, sit, sit. You expected us all along. I invite you to read some of these other poems on your own and at your own leisure. Those are 6 reasons why I stumble along and try to navigate my way through the light and shadows in myself and in the world with the help of the poem. Today I brought in some poems that, by other people that speak to me that have been very important to me and that I really, really like. These were some poems I needed and feel lucky to have found. Look at the cartoon on the front of your packet there. Where Charlie Brown's sister in that first panel says, we've been reading poems in school, but I never understand any of them. Some of my students will read a poem once and jump quickly to the conclusion that this sucks, right? That's the first thing about it, this sucks. And oftentimes what that really means is I skimmed it once, but I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I think that's kind of important. I urge them, and I'm urging you, to step up and do your work as a reader before you either accept or dismiss a poem. That matters. Do I like it isn't the first question when you encounter a poem as a reader. What does the poem say is the first question. Spending your time as a reader on what the poet is saying. Reading it, rereading it again. Who's the speaker? What's the occasion? Can you explicate it? Can you define the words? What's the tone? What's the structure? Spending your time and doing your work to meet the poet halfway. That's first. What does the poem say? After you determine what it says, that's when you move to the second question, which is what does it mean? What does the poem mean? That's a question of analysis, and answering that takes work on your part too. It doesn't unfold on its own. You have to meet the poem. Step up and meet it halfway in order to meet the challenges of interpretation. She says, I never understand any of them in the cartoon, but understanding comes from doing your work too, to meeting the poem. It's after that that taste and judgment become issues. Then you ask, do I like it or not? What value does the poem have, and what makes me think so? And these are aesthetic questions. And they're important too. Look at the second and third panel of the cartoon. How am I supposed to know which poems to like? Well, somebody tells you. Unfortunately, that's how some people determine what poems are good, which texts they're supposed to like. Through received authority, external validation from teachers or critics or parents or best of lists or whatever. And that's a loss. Whatever moves us deeply, occasions awe and wonder, is spiritual, no matter through what venue it may come to us. The images in poems that carry energy for us derive from the spirit world that animates the material world, and they provide a linkage between the world we can see and the world we cannot. I think it's very important to pay attention to other people's ideas and judgments about poems. Listen carefully to them, think about what you hear, but don't stop there. Your job is to go beyond what other people tell you about what poems mean and which poems to like, beyond what tradition venerates. Ask yourself which poems you find worthy of your soul. Risk attending to this liberating principle of resonance. The poems I'm writing today are poems that resonate for me. They may not for you. Some may not. You'll find poems through this course and through your reading beyond this course that resonate for you. If something resonates within, it is somehow about you and for you. And I think you need to pay attention to that. That's important. This last present I brought you in this packet is a powerful and short essay by Adrienne Rich that has really mattered to me, and I hope you might like it too. I urge you to read it, think about it, and especially about how it relates to the notion this evening I spoke about how poetry inspires truth and freedom. So take that away with you. And thanks again for having me here today. I appreciate it.